Yeah, so I've been talking about man and his ability to be caught up with himself and his intellect and his knowledge. Man in and of himself believes in his knowledge and what he's able to achieve and conquer and acquire for himself. So now that makes man biased and makes him actually lose focus of his essence. And when I say essence, I mean the core of who he is. I mean the God consciousness in him. So um, Christ said, "He that is in you is greater than he that is in the world." And he that is in you is the God consciousness, and he that is in the world is the avatar, this body housing the God consciousness in you. So man in his short-sightedness, or would I say in his tendency to you know be equal with his peers, or to meet up with the expectations of his society at large, he has ended up in limiting himself to the point where he fails to recognize the God consciousness that's within him. He fails to recognize that there is God deeply seated in him, and that there is this sanctuary in him from where he can have his being. Yeah. So I like to talk about the God within us, and also I want to talk about um, depression, anxiety, worry, gruesomeness, anguish, longing, all these strong emotions and how they come to be, and exactly where they stem from, and how we can deal with them and get to free and rid ourselves of these strong emotions, because we both can attest to the fact that they are so heavy on us, and we can't deny them. We can deny the existence of them. Yeah, so I bring to you this day the concept of the human mind. Yeah, the human mind is limited in and of itself, because man tries to find fulfillment from what he can do for himself, from the effort he can put into something, from the from having to strive to achieve something, for having to suffer, for having to sweat for, his needs, for having to, you know, get something for himself and do better by himself, and, trying to raise his status, or try to, you know, just achieve something for himself. And while he's at while he's at it, he feels like maybe once he achieves this, he will feel fulfilled in himself. But then he finds out that he achieves this and he wants to achieve more. He gets to this point, he wants to, raise the bar. He achieves a certain status, he wants to raise the bar to that status. You know, so you see that man is never satiated by whatever he tries to seek or find outside of himself. None of that fulfills him. None of that makes him whole. None of that completes him. So, that said, I would like to let you know that this human avatar and this human mind and this human consciousness, no, this human consciousness, yeah, is only limited to this world, and it can only do so much, because the powers that be and the society at large has made it this way so that man can be deprived and misdirected and eluded of this God source or consciousness within him. because if we are all made aware of this consciousness, then we really wouldn't depend on a lot of things. And when I say a lot of things, I mean vices, I mean our religious teachers, I mean a lot of dependencies. Like we wouldn't actually have any addictions or any vices whatsoever, because we would totally be in control of ourselves. But just because of the societal constructs and how the world and the powers that be have really, made everything to be, they made it in such a way that man has to be made subject to these things, so that man can be made limited, and man can be put in a box and put in a place, so that he doesn't really become all that he's called to be, or all that he is made to be you know So that said, I would like to let you know that depression and these strong emotions of anxiousness and worry and gruesomeness and anguish that we feel deep within our soul, I would say that in and of itself, it is not a negative emotion. It is not negative in any way. Actually, that is your soul. That is the God consciousness within you crying out to you. Like I said, he that is in you is greater than he that is in the world. So that should show you how much that man has become so caught up with this avatar, that he has become deluded, and he has become, oblivious of the God source that is within him. He has become oblivious of the wholeness and the completeness of God that is within him, and from which he should have his being and become all that he's called to be. You see, I mean, it's just like I know that a lot of us have been in dreams where we have nightmare. We've been in deep sleep where we have this nightmare. Maybe we are being chased, by a certain figure or whatever animal, or maybe we are stuck in a place and we are trying to get out, but we don't find ourselves getting out, or maybe you're falling from a certain height. That fear that grips you, that fear, that anxiety, it is so strong. And then, if in the course of that dream you suddenly realize and say, wait a minute, this should be a dream. And once you have that awareness, once you come to the grip of that consciousness, you find out that almost immediately you your consciousness comes alive and you are woken up immediately. And then you find out that those strong emotions of fear almost disappear, like they dissipate almost immediately. And then in your waking life, you find out that you just wake up with a little of those emotions, and then you feel so safe and sound in your consciousness. So that is how it is, separating your God consciousness and this human avatar, this human mind. You see, man has become so caught up in trying to find God outside of himself. And when I say God, I don't just mean the God in the churches or the God in the religious institutions. I mean God in anything that makes man feel fulfilled of himself, be it his career, be it his family, be it, his vices, be it whatever. I mean, you can extrapolate this to whatever man finds outside of himself to complete himself. The more man finds this, the more man searches for this and finds it, the more he is deluded, the more he finds himself empty, the more he wants more. So you see that man is never satiated, man is never made full by anything he seeks outside of himself. I mean, even the virtues of love, of joy, of peace, of, sound mind and all of that, you can never find any of this outside of yourself. There is no God outside of yourself. Any God that you find outside of yourself is idolation. I mean, that is what Christ came here to point out to us. But now we have become so caught up with it that it's almost unbelievable to the human mind to say that God is within you. You tell someone that God is inside of them, and they'll be like, how can God be inside of me? Because now they look upon themselves with their limited lenses, with the human eye, based off of their background, based off of their status, based off of, how they were raised, based off of, how much they've experienced life, probably gone through the bad phases of life, and they feel like How can you say that God is inside me? They don't believe it. No one wants to believe that. They would rather go to a building and worship God, or they rather carve out a stone and worship and believe that that is God. But man also fails to realize that none of these other gods that he makes, none of these gods that he makes have life in them except the God that's within him. It's the God that's within him that gives this stone life. He gives this carved woods life. It makes whatever man makes outside of himself relevant. You see? So the God consciousness in you is actually who you are in your essence. Now, whatever you try to do outside of life, in your waking life, in your human life, in this world, is just what you do, but not who you are. Who you are in your essence is God and the consciousness of God and the breath of God. That is who you are. Because you are one with nature, you are one with the universe, you are one with all that is living. But this human mind, who is so limited, has so short-sighted us and short-circuited our beliefs that we think that God is outside of ourselves. And we try to find God outside of ourselves. And what this finding God outside of ourselves does to us is the more we find it, the more we are deluded. But the more we try to numb our consciousness, the more we try to, you know, we try to numb ourselves, numb this consciousness, numb this probing that is deep in our hearts, because this God consciousness tries to probe us. That is why we feel depressed. That is why we feel anxiety. That is why we feel worry. We are not fulfilled. We feel empty. We feel hollow. Despite whatever acquisitions we might have, we still find out that there is a certain longing in us because we have not recognized this consciousness. And this